To the Going Green podcast. And today we're going to look at, can we make Black Friday green? Maybe green again, or maybe should we be making Black Friday green? Or should we have been having Green Friday every day? Oh, it sounds exciting, doesn't it?
I know.
But one of the problems is, I suppose, we've got Black Friday every year. It marks the sort of the week after American Thanksgiving, when retailers hope to go back into the black again, and they basically sell a terrific sort of amount of stuff on Black Friday. And now it's sort of Black Friday week and Cyber Monday, and I hope you've just managed to survive that and have bought. Well, I wonder what you might have bought.
Well, in fairness, so it's one of those days where, because it's marking the Christmas, all the shops put on their lovely deals on. And I'm not saying there aren't any reasons to do those sorts of things. There are deals to be made because they're trying to sell things. I'm not stopping all those things, but one of the major things reported from Black Fridays, and this is a dime a dozen, is that and we're only talking for a specific group, so the UK, that waste approximately 3.9 billion on Black Friday purchases that they haven't used or don't even remember using. And this is previous. You go out, you bought something, you say, "Oh, that'd be wonderful," and then you don't use it, and which is a horrific amount of money. You think if you used, let's say, 4 billion, because as of products in the UK, you sort of like, you wouldn't need then another 4 billion products in this time of crisis of the cost of living, and then suddenly living without things. It's one of those things where that's the story of how things go.
Yeah, well, I know a true story of my mother-in-law. She'd bought a book, she'd read it, and then a bit later she found a special deal on Black Friday. This book was, super reduced, and so she bought it, having forgotten that she'd actually read the book. And when she got it, she put it nicely on her bookshelf next to an identical copy of it. Now, that would be bad, apart from she did it twice.
I know. Yes, it's unfortunately one of those things, but it is that point about sort of doing these things, buying not needlessly, that's the wrong way to put it, but it is buying things for the sake of buying. And we've always spoken on this podcast how generally consumerism is bad. It's like today I learned the most interesting of facts, that if we lived, the whole world lived the average American style consumerism,
Consumerism and all that
sort of stuff, right? We would approximately need 5.1 Earths to sustain that level of consumption. That's taking all the things that are being produced and all those sorts of things and being pumped into America. So we need 5.1 Earths to do that. And admittedly,
we've only got one.
Now, let's throw that the other way. If we lived the life of a Indian person, a person from India, with their consumption, we would actually need 0.7 Earths, as in we could actually fit the consumption of the entire world if we all live the typical Indian lifestyle. Now,
whatever that is.
Well, it's one of those unfortunate things where you look at it and say, well, they're quite not impoverished out there, but they don't.
Well, some are, and some aren't. I have friends from India, and some of them live a really sort of American lifestyle, and I have others who came from a much more, well, dare I say, primitive. I had one student that came to this country to work and sort of basically get educated, and he come from an environment where they actually didn't have any electricity. So let alone anything else. It was sort of quite interesting to think that they had that. Yet, even those places, he still had a mobile phone
So,
and he still had a charger. It was one of these wind up chargers. So I suppose he actually did manage to run his phone for sort of next to nothing.
yes. So anyway, so it was just one of those lovely, interesting things. But it is this basis of how much we consume, and that could
Yeah.
this year, 2022, be a year where we finally say not to no to consumerism, but more importantly,
Less to
less
consumerism.
consumer.
Well,
Actually make it sustainable consumerism.
Well, we're coming up to Christmas, and in this country, we are in an economic crisis. We've actually joined the rest of the world having an economic crisis. We've just come out of COVID and this sort of global pandemic that we've all suffered from. We're all suffering from Putin's act of unwanted aggression against Ukraine, and we're all feeling a bit poorer. So I was talking to one of my neighbours, and she was saying, "Well, it's going to be a bit poorer this Christmas. I've got a choice. Do we have Christmas dinner, or do I sort of heat the house?" In fact, she's got a system round that. She's barely heating the house, and she's not going to have Christmas dinner because she's going to visit her mum. And her mum's supplying Christmas dinner. She's found a way around that problem that
Ah, yes.
works well, yes. But basically, can we cut down? I talked to another relative, and they were saying, yeah, buying the kids presents. Last year they just unwrapped all these presents, and they never actually played with these toys really ever again. All they did was unwrap it, and they enjoyed doing that. I remember a certain boy, I'm not going to mention Paul by name here, but he got more pleasure out of the cardboard boxes and the wrapping paper that he got for Christmas than he did the presents. And he played with the wrapping paper and the boxes all day, had much more fun. I know he was 25 at the time, but no, he wasn't. He was about 2. And he really did enjoy playing with all those things. And it shows that you don't have to spend a lot of money for having good fun. Sometimes it's actually thinking about, well, what do we want? Well, perhaps we want good friends and we want family, and perhaps being with them is perhaps more important than some of the consumerism when you buy something that they don't want. And so you either ask them, well, what would you like? Or better still, what do you need? And trying to help them that way. Might it be a better idea for me to help one of my neighbours who's struggling trying to pay a bill by giving them a little bit of money? And that might actually make a difference to them.
Yes, and that's fair enough. One of the classical things around this time, instead of giving a gift, an actual physical gift, you give the gift of giving, as in, let's say let's say you sponsor a child, or you do donate money to a charitable cause over Christmas, and then you give that, say, to someone as a thing. Those think ideas that people saying, although they haven't received anything, they can actually say, oh, I get all these things about sort of how I could have done well, and sort of all the how my charity's working. You could give a subscription to a charity, 12-month subscription, all those sort of things where it's just the idea that sort of is not necessarily
Yeah.
needed, the reason of giving.
So I asked my mum, what do you want for Christmas? And she says, well, I don't really need anything, dear. So what do I get her? Do I buy her something she doesn't want? She probably won't need. Or might I buy her something like a subscription to a charity, plant a tree, anything?
Well, yeah,
really.
exactly.
And
It's not,
and some of these things, they give you a nice little certificate to say she's done this.
well, they write to you every month or
Yeah,
so.
and that can be quite good. So back to Black Friday. Black Friday facts. Basically, we spend an awful lot of money on Black Friday. I was reading here £3.9 billion
Yeah, and I know we said this already.
spent on Black Friday. Yeah, and the bit I was going to come back on that was, having spent that, how much of that wasn't needed?
Well, I can tell you the number.
It's
but
about 3.9 billion, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, well, it's actually one of those things where approximately only 40% of those things are actually returned. Of say Black Friday gifts or
And
deals.
that's a staggering amount to be given back.
Yeah, and it's not saying you know of those given back, but it's more the point of those things that haven't been used. It's like one of these things reporting of just sort of approximately sort of I'll just get the statistic up. There'll be a slight moment while I re-get the, and it was something daft by saying 33%. There we go. I knew it was something though. People admit to buying something that they never needed or never wanted, and
But they buy it because it's cheap.
but they buy it because it's just cheap. And and I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's sort of buying something cheap because it was cheap is not really a reason to buy it. Yeah, that's just
But there are a lot of things that basically they cost quite a lot, and they might be a bit cheaper on Black Friday. Now, this isn't always the case. Sometimes things are put up a bit before Black Friday and they're reduced a little bit. I did notice something that I was interested in buying, and I worked out how much it was beforehand, and I wanted to see if it was going to be any better in Black Friday. It was actually more expensive. Needless to say, I didn't buy it, and it wasn't going to be very expensive anyway. And it was something, well, did I really need it? And the answer is, of course, desperately. So I didn't buy it.
yeah. I know it's just one of those things where you're having these things, and one of the major points about Black Friday is not how much stuff was made, but it's also how much stuff was delivered. You know, an staggering amount of not extra deliveries because it is this sort of time when deliveries happen, and but it is the amount of stuff being processed. There's the plastic waste, the cardboard boxes, all those sorts of things. You know, Black Friday in their, I say, deliveries and all those sorts of things is equal to approximately 0.12% of the UK's total emissions, and it's a staggering sort of footprint that is. And and you can't really say, was it worth it? Was it worth all these things? We talk about quite a lot of things where there's this thing called e-waste, which is electronic waste, which is much worse than say a normal cardboard box because it's got all these metals and materials that are or non-recyclable. And so the struggle there is saying, you bought this, let's say you bought this new battery charger or cable to charge your phone. Great, lovely. What you could do with the old one? Well, I'm just going to throw it in the bin, or any attempt to recycle is invalid because, well, it's all covered in plastic and which can't be recycled, and therefore then it just goes and sits there. It can't be recycled, and so you just generated a new cable. Now, I'm not saying if it's cable broken, then, I'm not saying not to replace it, but you can suddenly see the problem of basically we are buying products that are non-recyclable, and I'm not saying they can't be. I'm saying that, but it is a struggle to recycle, and the processes of recycling aren't there, and it's the scale of which they need to be recycled at to make a more sustainable world. I'm talking, talking about the plastic sheathing or cabling. It's important because otherwise we'll all get electrocuted. Now, I'm not saying not to use the plastic, but can we use a different type of plastic, or is there a better way to recycle a plastic? Making a tire out of it. Those kind of ideas of sort of trying to get forward in the recycling of things. So,
One of the things that I always ask if for Black Friday is before I get to Black Friday, I look at the product and see how much it costs. That's the first thing I do. The second one is I want something. So I don't buy it. Now that sounds daft, but it's not I don't buy it. I don't buy it for a time. And basically, maybe I give it a week. And after a week, I say to myself, do I still desperately want this? And sometimes the answer is, well, no, you don't. And other times we have a big argument, Paul and I, about whether I need this. And one of us wins, usually me, and I buy what I want.
Yeah, well, as stated, let's say you have a wire that's broken and you need to replace it.
But that's a different question, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a different question, because you've got something that doesn't work and you're replacing it, and it needs to be used. But what I'm saying is, let's say instead of buying that bottle of freshening makeup, what's wrong with the thing you haven't finished? Now, if you finish that bottle of, say, perfume, whatever, then that's fine. But if you've already got a half bottle and you're just buying a new bottle, that's the point about it.
I think one of the questions you always ask for any consumerism is, why do I want this? And that's the first thing. And then from that, you come to a lot of other questions about sort of, well, who's trying to sell this to me? Do I trust this brand? Do I already have something like that? When will I use it? How much will I use it? Will I still be using this next year? Loads of questions I'm sort of asking. But I suppose the basic question I usually ask is, why is this cheaper? And for some things, I work out that it's actually better to buy certain things on Black Friday week. I have a couple of subscriptions, and I make sure that I buy them on the Black Friday week. Why? Well, basically because it's half the price.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where, businesses, in an attempt to generate more income, basically you've got a difference between volumes and price. So let's say one person buys something for 50 quid and you've made 50 quid as a business. However, as a business, let's say 2 people buy, then that's great. But what if you say people not willing to buy at 50, but let's say people willing at 10, or I was going to say 30, right? And so now 2 people bought at 30, that is greater than the one person buying at 50. And if you scale that up, you can eventually say, if I drop the price down, will I get more people buying it? And the usual answer is probably. The answer is, let's say you drop something down by 50%, half price, then is the likelihood you're going to encourage people to, more than double the amount of people to buy something at half price? And the honest answer is yes. And that's, and that's why they do it. It's not a reason why they, if it wasn't successful, they wouldn't be doing it. But it's the reason people go for and say, all that's worth it. That's actually, because that's probably what the real price is, as opposed to not all the markup, but it's more the value that you're actually saying something's worth. If a company says, oh, this is 50 quid because I've just made an arbitrary number of a product, pencil case worth 50 quid. And people say, yeah, but I can buy, that's not really worth it. And why is it worth 50 quid?
Because it's got this label on it. Now, I have a niece who bought some sort of trainers, and these trainers are sort of £250. Now, my trainers don't cost anything like that. In fact, I don't now have a pair of trainers, but I don't go running anymore, and I don't feel the need for doing that. So why do you need to spend £250 on a pair of trainers that are probably only worth £1 at the most?
Yeah, and it is this problem of the value of a product. And that's not even taking consideration whether the company is a good name, if that makes any sense. I know previously back in the old days, you remember Boss, and they were basically doing child labor in China with making all the jeans, the denim jeans, and it was that found out, and suddenly, of course, then it was sort of like their not their record was tainted, but suddenly, you were buying these jeans that had exploited workers just because um
Yeah.
and suddenly people say, well, I'm not going to buy those jeans from Boss anymore. I'm going to buy it from
Someone
whoever.
who's a little bit more reputable. So, do you ask when you buy something, certain questions before you buy anything? Do you ask, where's it come from? You know, was it made sustainably? Very
Oh,
hard sometimes to find that one out. Is the product I'm buying eco-friendly? Was it made in an eco-friendly way? Will this product improve my life? There's loads of questions here. How about this one? Could I buy this thing second hand?
ooh, well,
And yeah, that's a good one. And sort of, how about purchase of clothes second hand? We do have some second hand clothes shops, but how much is actually recycled? You came up, Paul, with a horrific figure.
yeah. Well, I think my horrific figure is a bit more tainted with lots of caveats, so that's why. Apparently, 1% of clothes are recycled into new clothes. And you might say, oh, that seems a bit bad. But if I say the caveat of clothing, of textiles recycled into another set of clothing, let's say you got a bedspread and you suddenly turn that into a shirt, that's what we're talking about. But if you just had an old t-shirt on you and that was, threw that away, where's that going? And the likely answer, daftly, is into things like a tire. Yeah. And so, which isn't, of course, clothing. And so, as I said, one of these things where this statistic I found, which looked awful, if you take away or looked at the caveats, is just one of those things where, oh, that sort of makes sense. Clothing isn't turned into new clothing; it is turned into things like tires because that's how recycling happens, as opposed to making a new T-shirt. Now, if you had, say, a large cloth and that was turned into a T-shirt because that's how it works, then that's fair enough. And
Yeah.
so this idea of technically secondhand recycling something new isn't worth it. And is it better to give something a new lease on life? Is it to go and say buy instead of going buying brand new clothes? Why don't you go to the secondhand store where they probably have, not brand new of this year, but they've got, clothes that you
Well,
can
yeah,
wear.
yeah. Some people won't buy something because, well, that's terribly last year. I wouldn't be seen dead going out in that. Yet the year before, they were quite happy to go out in that because it's sort of fashion. I gave up fashion. I don't know when really. I think I never actually got into fashion really. Um, Basically because a lot of the time, well, I couldn't afford it. And, as a student, I couldn't afford various things. And so you did without, or you say, well, I'm not going to be that fashionable. Back on clothes, um, it's all right in some families. What they do is they do hand me downs, and that's another way of recycling. It's all right. I had a younger sister, and she didn't seem to mind wearing some of the boys' clothes. Whereas I have a feeling that if I'd had an elder sister, I might not have liked to have worn some of her hand me downs.
Yeah, it's one of those challenging things of hand-me-downs, but it's the idea of suddenly if extending the life of the product, extending how long you use the product, and those things are useful, and those things are not worth it. That's the wrong way to say, but that's the if you can make something last longer than its lifespan,
Yeah,
then that's where to go. That's fine.
yeah. Because I had a problem with you because you were near. Paul has an older brother, 2 years older, and his brother is a little bit bigger than him when he was growing up, but in fact, not enough. that by the time one had worn it out, I couldn't use it as a hand-me-down to the next one, because the kids don't tend to wear clothes out. They tend to grow out of the clothes. And your problem was you kept growing nearly as fast as your brother. And now, of course, your brother's a little bit smaller than you
Yes,
are.
it's
Yes.
I now give him my handy downs. It's quite good. Getting my own back. So those ideas of how things work and sort of those things are looking for, are no problem. Now, alongside all this, I read an interesting thing that the French government were actually planning on banning Black Friday. I say a couple of years ago, and they wanted to do it because of all the problems of the consumerism and all the environmental issues and those sort of things, and they all sounded great. And then they examined what they were actually banning, and they were going to be banning companies in France, from having any sales. And so it's one of those things where the idea of, you know, Black Friday and it's all the consumerism, it's all, nuanced in relation to this is how we live our lives. But one of the more important things about sort of the Black Friday is, could it be done differently? And there is a campaign which is essentially called Buy Nothing Day.
Yeah. So that took place on Friday, November the 25th. It was a 24-hour detox from consumerism. And it's a wonderful thing, because you don't actually have to do Buy Nothing Day just on, of course, Friday, November the 25th. You can do it any day of any sort of week of the year that you want to. Have a Buy Nothing Day. Sometimes I decide I'm going to have a Buy Nothing week. Well, it doesn't quite work out like that, because I still want food.
Yeah, I know.
But we're talking here more about consumerism. We're talking about, do I need to go out and buy certain items of clothing, certain items of equipment? Do I need a new camera? Do I need a new lens? Do I need a new whatever? And basically the answer is, well, quite often not. And sometimes it is this: don't do an impulse buy, but instead say, do I need this? Leave it a week. Do I still need this? And then ask some other questions about sort of, well, can I buy a better, cheaper, more eco-friendly type of thing that I'm looking for? So this Buy Nothing Day, think of this rather than sort of do it on one day a year, perhaps on Black Friday, but why not try it out sort of perhaps once a week, or dare I say several times a week?
Yes, and that's one of those things where it is that reducing of consumption. It is making our species consumptions more sustainable, because, of course, it is that argument of, we are running out of stuff, and if we just continue to make new stuff, we won't have any new stuff or stuff to make the new stuff out of, and suddenly there's a problem, which is, more the argument why we should be recycling. Except the problem is the fact that we're not recycling not as much as we can, but things aren't recyclable because they just aren't. And so, the common adage, you sort of are, instead of buying plastic cutlery, the paper plates essentially, the plastic, why don't you buy bamboo ones? Because, of course, that is a sustainable resource. And suddenly you're off at the races and able to make your, I say purchase, but make your life more sustainable.
And while you're doing that, make everybody else's life sustainable. We only have one world. We can't go to the 5 world policy of sort of huge amount of consumerism. So what we're saying is, think before you buy. And if you still really need to buy this thing after having had a good think, ask yourself questions. Is it environmentally friendly? And is it sort of sustainable? And if it's not, can you buy a version that is? You've been listening to the Going Green podcast, looking at Black Friday, I suppose. And next time, we'll be back, hopefully next week, and we'll look at another issue about going green. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Bye.